Hello, welcome to the video version of my journal. I'm Steffanie Rivers. Welcome, kings and queens, to the conversation. You're watching me. I'm Steffanie Rivers, and this is my journal. I am tricasting on YouTube and Facebook Live and LinkedIn. So if you are watching me on any of those channels, we want to welcome you to the conversation. If you're new, welcome. And if you are returning, welcome back. I know a lot of you are getting ready for Easter, but I thank you for stopping in. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that when I post new videos, you will be the first to know. Now, I'm sure that many of you have read the book titled Just Mercy, or you might have seen the biopic starring Michael B. Jordan as the Alabama civil rights attorney who saved more than 125 men from death row in Alabama who were wrongfully accused and wrongfully convicted. The movie has been out a few years, so you probably have seen it by now, but I'm bringing it up because of its connection to the Derek Chauvin murder trial. So stay with me. If you know anything about Bryan Stevenson, you know he is the subject of the biopic Just Mercy. And he also wrote, or the book is about his life and his experiences working to free wrongly convicted men in Alabama. In addition to his work in the courtroom, Stevenson founded the Equal Justice Initiative to bring attention to racial injustices around the country. And he created a museum in Montgomery, Alabama, that lists the names etched in steel beams of all the people who have been lynched around the country, all the Black known victims of lynchings in every state in the United States. And as part of the museum, he has collected soil under from the ground of where those lynchings took place across the country. And so I'm going to share my screen with you and show you, in case you are within driving distance. If you're in driving distance from Montgomery, Alabama, or if you are involved with history in any way, it is well worth your time to travel to the Equal Justice Initiative museum. A lot of us in the Black community, we know of it as the lynching museum. So a lot of us, that's what it's been called, and that's what a lot of people know it as. But in addition to the names of every known victim of lynching being etched in steel beams, there's also the soil from the location of the lynchings that is housed there as well. And there is also a section of the museum whereby it's a simulated cave where slaves were held, so simulated slave quarters. And it has the stories of some of the men who Bryan Stevenson has helped to be released from death row. So again, it is well worth your time to go. We are conditioned to, I think it's important for people to go because we are conditioned to never forget 9/11. We are conditioned to never forget the Holocaust, Never forget the Oklahoma City bombing or the place where JFK was shot, or other notable historical events in American history. But when it comes to the negative effects of slavery, descendants of American slaves are told to, oh, forget about that, so the country can heal and move on. But I think the Equal Justice Initiative does the best job of helping African descendants of American slaves to remember their history in this country and what we are owed. And I think the EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, does its part to not allow white racist people to escape their past of brutality when it comes to treatment of African Americans. Yet the truth is, we aren't that far removed from when public lynchings of Black people were accepted in the United States. That realization dawned on me when I received my 2021 calendar from the Equal Justice Initiative. They sell memorabilia. When you go there, of course, with any museum, they have a shop, a memorabilia shop where you can take mementos back with you. And one of the things that they have on sale is a calendar. And this calendar, for every day of the year, they have events in history that help to remind you about things that went on. Now, I have started to take those events and I take pictures of them with my phone. And then on my social media platform, I post every day whatever event it has. So, for example, on April 10th, which we hadn't gotten there yet, but April 10th, 1956, it says, 4 white men attacked African-American singer Nat King Cole while he was on stage performing for an all-white audience in Birmingham, Alabama. Then it says, in 1951, U.S. Supreme Court orders new trials for 2 Black defendants sentenced to death in Groveland, Florida. Local sheriff later shoots both men. Then it says 1958. This is April 6, 1958. After Alabama executes wrongfully convicted Black teen Jeremiah Reeves, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. leads a public protest rally in Montgomery. This says in 1921, on April 5th, 1921, the murder trial begins against white Georgia planter accused of killing 11 Black sharecroppers, and he is convicted. Let's see, 1981, when is it? March 18th, 1981, after Mobile, Alabama jury acquits a Black man of killing a white police officer, Ku Klux Klan members randomly kidnap and kill 19-year-old Michael Donald, a Black man, and hang his body from a tree. So, and that was in 1981. There's things going back to the 1800s. Events. There are things that happened as a short time ago as 1981. That's what, 30 years ago, 30 something years ago, 40 years ago. So the thing is that we are not that many generations removed from when public lynchings or killings of Black people by racist white people was accepted, whereby they could do it, and although they might be arrested for it, being convicted for it or being punished for it was something that probably was not going to happen, and thereby that developed the white privilege of killing Black people and getting away with it. And so, like I said, I've committed to posting these events on my social media platforms So if you are my Facebook friend or my Twitter friend, Twitter follower, then you probably have seen me post those, and I try to do it. I think I do it on Instagram as well. The dates on these events prove that lynching Black people, including pregnant women and children, was something that white people did on the regular. And I believe that Derek Chauvin committed a modern day public lynching of George Floyd as a message. So stick with me. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Hold on. Like, share, and subscribe. I don't even think you saw my soil. I didn't tell you. Let's see. Okay, so going back to the museum, these are some of the bottles that the jars rather that hold the soil that was underneath the lynchings, where the lynchings were held for the thousands of men and women across the country. And they have their name and the date and the location. So, again, if you are in the vicinity of Montgomery, Alabama, we want for you to please go and support the Equal Justice Initiative, because they are doing great things to hold racist white people, the system of inequality and the justice system in America. They're doing great things to hold them accountable. So, again, please, if you want to support them or want to know more about them, you can go to eji.org to learn more about Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stevenson. So it is my belief that that Derek Chauvin was not just only, when you looked at let me start here. I've never witnessed a murder before I saw the video of George Floyd's murder. And I've asked myself, what would I have done had I been on the scene in person? Would I have risked my life to try to save his? Would I have done something differently if he was my father, if George Floyd was my brother, if he was my son? I'm sure you've asked yourself the same thing, because the trial testimonies of the witnesses who were there in Minneapolis that day, we now know that they struggle with bystanders' remorse. If you looked at, and if you didn't look at any of these, you can also go back to YouTube or do your own research. But the off-duty EMT who happened to be going by the area, her name was Genevieve Hansen. She offered to give CPR to George Floyd until the ambulance got there, and Derek Chauvin and the cops on the scene refused her request, refused her offer. Donald Williams, he was the mixed martial arts expert who knew a death hold when he saw one, and pleaded with the cops to get off his neck, please let him breathe, because he knew that it was just a matter of time before George Floyd was going to be dead. And then there was Darnella Frazier. She was 17 at the time, and she had her 9-year-old cousin with her, and they were walking to the store, and she stopped to take the video that has now changed our lives forever, and let us see firsthand what went on that fateful day. she was unable, they didn't show her face when she was testifying. And her 9-year-old cousin also testified. They didn't show their face live as they did the adults. But they have to live with that forever. And that is just not something that we as Black people in America are used to seeing. We know it happens, but actually seeing somebody die before our eyes is not something that I have seen. And a lot of people, I would say, have not seen that as well. But what was behind Chauvin's lack of empathy for the life he took? It seems like the witnesses on the stand had more remorse, had more feeling about what they experienced than the man who actually took his life. In fact, it seemed like Derek Chauvin was dead set on taking George Floyd's life, despite all that the people did and tried to do who were there. So most people would tell you they couldn't sit through the whole video. I know I couldn't sit through the whole video. And now we know it was more than 8 minutes, 49 seconds. It was 9 minutes and some more seconds that this actually went on. But if you ask your parents or your grandparents if they know of issues, or they know of family members who disappeared, or they know of neighbors who disappeared after some type of event in the community, or that people getting run off from their land, I'm sure they would have some stories to tell you if you care to listen. And just like our families pass down culture and pass down generational lessons in our families, there are some white people who pass down their own customs, and they teach their children to hate Black people and hate brown people. They teach their children that a Black man's life is less valuable than theirs. And they teach us that, or they teach their children that what happened to George Floyd, the modern day public lynching, is acceptable. History books, if you look back, history books say that they call it like a lynch mob, which made you think of them being unruly, kind of like what we saw on January 6th, the storming of the Capitol, the insurrection, the mob out of control. But really, lynch mobs, true to fact, lynch mobs were very organized. They were as organized as Easter Sunday service, church service. You know, they had everything lined up. They knew who was going to do what. They invited you in. You had your little food. You sat down. If you do the research, it was very organized, and it commonly involved police officers, even judges, even church people would sit around and publicly watch Black people be lynched. So white people, including white women and children, have a history of witnessing public lynchings of Black people. It was customary to take photos with the bodies. It was customary, that was like the original selfie, a lynched body. And then the white people would stand around and take pictures with it, and even take parts of the body with them home as mementos. So when people try to tell you, when they try to pass down stories about how other cultures are barbaric, how other cultures are uncultured, really they're just, is that called deflecting? Because white people in America are the barbarians, and that's according to history. It's not what I just feel. That's what I have read in the history books. Okay. And so The video of the scene of the event showed that cops, when they even approached George Floyd in his SUV, one of them had their gun out at the time when they approached him. So they automatically assumed that he was guilty, even though they had just been called over a $20 counterfeit bill, didn't know any more than that. They assume that the Black person is guilty, and that often is what started public lynchings in American history. Somebody accuse a Black man of doing something, and white people go without any type of evidence, just show up at the scene and start accusing people, snatching them out of the house, and trying to punish them without being sure that they were guilty. In history, the Black people targeted by public lynchings were accused of crimes they might not have committed. They were lynched because they were just trying to exercise their right to vote, or whatever right as a American citizen, or for just being out of place, for not being as subservient as as a white person felt they should be. You know how you are walking down the street minding your own business, and that reminds me of the Soho Karen. She accused a 14-year-old boy of stealing her phone. He and his father were just minding their own business, going on their own way, and out of the blue, somebody just accuses you of something because you look like you are in a position where you might have done something wrong. But because they have not followed through with what they're supposed to do, now it's your fault. I talked last week about the family in North Carolina who was looking for their missing teenage relative, and the police officer, the law enforcement officer, and instead of going about it the right way, shows up to this family's house, the Black family, the only Black family in the neighborhood, accusing that guy, the teenager at that house, of being the person last seen with his relative when he had it all wrong. So they just are just, white privilege leads them to instigate and to agitate and to accuse people without evidence. And so that is how I think that with George Floyd's modern day lynching, that was not just not caring about his life and the value that he had and the father that he was and the loving brother and son that he was, but it was a sign. It reinforces when a man reduces, when I forgot to mention this, but the recorded cop cam of Derek Chauvin after paramedics had taken George Floyd away from the scene, and the 61-year-old man who was one of the witnesses on the scene, he asked Derek Chauvin, "Why did you do that? Why did you treat him like that after he was not resisting?" And Chauvin said something to the effect that, well, he's a sizable guy and he probably was on something. So they just assume that we are menaces to society. They just assume the worst. They try to, they try to make you a monster, or they try to reduce you to less than a man. So that helps when a white man does that to a Black man's image, that then the white man feels that elevates him in society. And I think that Derek Chauvin being so desensitized to taking the life of George Floyd is an example of the brutality that has been passed down in his family and in most white people's families throughout American history, because there is no other explanation for how he could have done what he did. And after the fact, to this day, unless it comes out, which I doubt it will, he has never apologized for taking his life, especially after all that has been said and done, and especially after listening to the bystanders' remorse, how remorseful they are. They couldn't do anything to help, but the person who had all the power in his hands in that moment didn't do anything and still doesn't act as if he should have done anything. So even if you listen to some defenders of Chauvin, it's just like some scriptures in the Bible. You can take the law and justify whatever a person already believes. Whether, you know how you take the Bible and you're sitting down and discussing what this scripture means, and you'll think one thing and that same scripture will lead somebody else to think another thing. The laws are the same way. Anybody can take the law and interpret it one way to satisfy what they want, and then another person can take that same law and interpret it another way to justify and prove what they want. So even if the jury does the right thing, which I believe is to convict Derek Chauvin of first-degree murder, then it's going to be up to the judge to uphold that conviction with an appropriate sentence. And you know, in America, we rarely get it that way. You rarely get a conviction and an appropriate sentence. First of all, you rarely get a conviction, so the sentence is a moot point. Now, these days, when you get a conviction, the judge somehow justifies reducing the sentence. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is convicted, but he doesn't get a comparable sentence. Because remember, it was racist cops and racist judges that throughout history have been privy to and have been a part of public lynchings of Black people, which is what we saw when we watched that modern day lynching of George Floyd. And so the question isn't whether or not they will convict him, which that is the question. So that remains to be seen with all that, all the testimonies and all the rest of the trial that we have to go. It's never open and shut. So you got to keep abreast of what's going on. Don't just watch the media that is agreeing with how you feel. You might feel like Chauvin is guilty. Don't just watch media that also thinks Chauvin is guilty. What I do is I turn to listen to media and listen to people who are trying to defend him to see what is it that they're saying. Because again, you'd be surprised to realize the same testimony that you thought is surely going to convict this fool is the same testimony that people who are defending him are saying, oh, that's one for the defense. That's going to show that he should be found not guilty. So the question really becomes, if he is acquitted, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to handle that? And how are we going to move forward? Because George Floyd's modern day lynching is, it wasn't just in and of itself that event in time. It was a message to the world, to Black people in America, that white people still feel like they're in control and they are willing to kill us. They're willing to bring back modern day lynchings to prove that they are still in control. And if he is found not guilty, that is going to be the biggest message of all. So we have to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So that's what I want you to be thinking about. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And what does prepare for the worst look like for you? And while you're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, be sure you go to Equal Justice Initiative. That is the Brian Stevenson founded entity in Montgomery, Alabama, that helps, that they founded the Equal Justice Initiative Museum, the Lynching Museum, and they are doing great things to help hold racist white people, or the history of racism in America, hold them accountable for what the injustices that they've done to African Americans. And so I suggest, I'm a supporter, and I ask you to go and check out their information. And I see Art Sampson at Art Sampson, thanks, from the UK. Wow. So don't know what time it is there, but thanks for being here and supporting me, Art. So to find out more about the things that I care about, you can go to the written version of my journal at eurweb.com. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe in case, so when I post new videos, you will be the first to know. And I normally post them on Sundays, since and it's Sunday, Saturday night, Sunday. So you have a productive week, and keep shining a spotlight into the dark. And we'll see you next time on the Journal of Steffanie Rivers.